Some siblings really get along. For those of you who have siblings, you know what I'm talking about. Like, it seems like some siblings, they just really get along. For those of you who don't have siblings, you didn't grow up with a brother or sister, you don't really know a whole lot of what I'm talking about, but you can obviously see in other people, and then there's always those other siblings, they just don't get along. You know what I mean? Like, these two will be closer than anything, and these three will just be at odds with those two. For me, it was a house of five kids, okay? And I was the last buckaroo. My mom actually made the joke when I was born. She said, "This is the last. We're done." So it was Michael, because Michael is the archangel with the trumpet blast on it. So she said, "We're done, Michael. You're done." And that's how I got my name. And so then the older brothers, the three, they had their own, club, the fight club. We don't talk about it, but it was there, that they had. And I was just kind of the lonely loner, And then right in the middle of us was the sister, the single girl. Boy, how would you like that? Surrounded by a bunch of boys. And, whew. Well, I guess I wouldn't really like the opposite either, so there's that. But, there's always some that get along and some that don't. Either way, did you notice that older siblings just kind of have a tendency to stick their nose in the younger siblings' business? You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about. Like, it seems like no matter how old you get, you're always the younger sibling. You're always the baby brother, in my case. And it seems like that just never really goes away. And this surfaces in all kinds of things, right? For those younger siblings, you know what I'm talking about. You might come across as nagging or parenting or reprimanding or advising or giving unwanted counsel. It can be babying. It can be all kinds of different things. For me, my sister played with me simply because she felt like she had to, her words. That's fun. Here I was thinking I was just a ball of joy. Well, my sister had her own ideas, I guess. And it's, the older siblings, you gotta kind of do certain things and whatever. And now that I'm a parent, I'm on kind of the other side of it. And it's a lot more irritating from this point of view, because kids have a tendency to try to do your job for you. Now, if you've had kids, you know what I'm talking about. Where you'll be trying to teach this one something, and this one will come over and try to, slip in their 2 cents. And it's like, "Hey, got it covered, thanks. Got it covered. Go do something. Go play outside or something. Go." And I've noticed the tendency is for the older ones to do this. It's not always the case. Sometimes the middle child and stuff, they'll come in and throw you for a curveball. And then sometimes it's your youngest that'll come in and try to tell the older ones oh boy, that's fun to see how that unravels. But in the midst of all this, it definitely causes problems when you got, your kids trying to do your job for you, which brings us to a very interesting question. We're looking at the story of the prodigal, and we have to ask the question, where in the world is the brother? Where in the world is the brother, the prodigal's brother? Where is he? Let's go through this. And so today we're looking at the prodigal brother, and you might say, now, hold on, the prodigal, that's talked about for the son, right? Well, prodigal actually comes to us through the Latin. For instance, it's used in Roman law to talk about somebody who kind of needed a minder because they weren't overly great with their finances. So in that context and how it is defined nowadays, it's anyone really nowadays who gives lavishly or spends resources recklessly, right? So in every marriage, there's a prodigal, isn't there? We're not laughing at that one. Okay, moving on. But so the prodigal definitely does apply to the son because he was reckless with his wealth, but it also applies to the brother and even the fathers we're going to see. They all were abundant and lavish with certain things, and I'll kind of explain what that is. And I'll just kind of recap here. Last week we were looking at what is the story actually about, and I brought up the point that for every parable there's one main point for every one main character. So the prodigal son has three main characters, so it has three main points. And last week we looked at the pretty much the prodigal son, how he kind of came back, and the whole idea of you can come back. Let's look at it this time, and we're only going to pay attention to the older brother. He also said, a man had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share I have coming to me." So he distributed the assets to them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered together all he had and traveled to a distant country. where he squandered his estate in foolish living. After he had spent everything, a severe famine struck that country, and he had nothing. Then he went to work for one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. He longed to eat his fill from the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one would give him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food, and here I am dying of hunger? I'll get up, go to my father, and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired workers.' So he got up and went to his father. But while the son was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven, and in your sight I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father told the servant, 'Quick, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Then bring the fattened calf and slaughter it, and let's celebrate with a feast, because this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate." Now stop right there. We have gotten over halfway through the parable, and the older brother still has not surfaced. Doesn't that seem odd? So now, let's keep going. Verse 25. "Now his older son was in the field. As he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he summoned one of the servants, questioning what these things meant. 'Your brother is here,' he told him, 'and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and didn't want to go in. So his father came out and pleaded with him." Notice the wording here. "But he replied to his father, 'Look, I have been slaving many years for you, and I have never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me a goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your assets with prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him.' 'Son,' he said to him, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" A lot of stuff going on here. A lot of really good stuff. And I'm going to try not to give spoilers about next week. We're talking about the father. And we're gonna just focus on the brother. Okay, I'm doing my best here. Oh, it's difficult sometimes, but I'm holding in there. So, right there, we missed it because we're Americans. We don't really think like they did back then. But also, we don't really have the same kind of cultural norms here. So we really missed it. But the big question in all this is, where is the older brother? How can we have all of these events happen and the older brother never surfaces? How is that possible? Let's read just through verses 11 through 13 again, just to kind of make sure we're all getting what he's saying. "He also said, 'A man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the estate I have coming to me." So he distributed the assets to them. Not many days later, the younger son had gathered together all he had and traveled to a distant country, where he squandered his estate in foolish living. Never once is the older brother mentioned in all these very important things that are happening. So let's kind of, why would we be surprised that the older brother is not? Well, we wouldn't. But for Jews, this would very much so be surprising. What's going on here? There's a few things. In the ancient culture, yes, but also the ancient Jewish culture, the firstborn, the eldest son, they had very special responsibilities. Responsibilities that the other siblings didn't fulfill. It's not because the oldest was the favorite, it's because they had a responsibility and a job to do, okay? For instance, if you'll remember the story in Genesis where Isaac is getting married to Rebekah, Rebekah's father, Bethuel, is alive and well. And yet, it was Rebekah's brother Laban that did the negotiation for the marriage. And Bethuel sits there and says nothing. Why? Because he was the oldest, he was the firstborn, that was his job. The father was there, but he was the one negotiating. Or, if you'll remember the story of Esau and Jacob, Esau had what was called the birthright. He got double portions because he was the firstborn. He traded them away, but he had them. And here in this story, there's no reason to assume that the younger brother got any more than a third of the estate. There's no reason to assume that. The older one would have gotten the 2/3. He would have gotten the 1/3. That's just how it worked. So, let's kind of, what does that have anything? Okay, hold on. Another one of the jobs of the older brother was to reconcile the father to the younger siblings. They kind of like an intermediary, like a mediator, that's the word. Kind of like that. But here, he does nothing. Nothing. Let's recap. Guy has 2 kids. The younger one basically tells the dad, I wish you were dead and I had all my money. And the dad says, okay, here you go. And the older brother says nothing. A couple days pass, and the younger one says, well, I'm out of Dodge. And the older brother still says nothing. Very odd. Very, very odd. Now, why is he doing this? Is it because he's apathetic? He just doesn't really care one way or another? Maybe it's because he's jealous. He feels like maybe the younger sibling is the dad's favorite. Maybe he just doesn't respect the father. It's very hard to know. But whatever, we have something that's not a normal occurrence and really it shouldn't have happened in the context, but does. So let's kind of move forward now to verse 25. And it says, now we're skipping all that other stuff. We looked at that last week, and we're just skipping all of it. All the son going away and what happens to his wealth and him coming back. We're skipping all that and getting to verse 25. Now his older son was in the field. As he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. Did you see that? He has been completely absent from the story. Then here he is, the day of his brother's renewal, and he is completely oblivious to the situation. He has no idea what's going on. Life was back to usual. He wasn't waiting for his brother to come back. Good riddance. Moving on. Now compare this with the father, which we'll look at next week, but compare this with the father who's actively looking for the son to come back. A complete difference of priorities between the father and the older brother. So now let's move on to verse 26, and it says, so he summoned one of the servants. He didn't go in himself, as would have probably been normal. Instead, he summons one of the servants, questioning what these things meant. Your brother is here, he told him, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. Then he became angry and didn't want to go in. So his father came out and pleaded with him. Big things happening. Big things happening. Not only did the older brother not do his job and reconcile the father with the younger sibling, he was actively carrying his offense towards the younger brother. And so he's outside pouting the situation, and he won't even go in. And so his father has to come out to him because he won't go in. So he's adding his own offenses to the situation, which this is an amazing thing. And we do this all the time. I'm better than them, so I could do something stupider than them. Okay, we do this all the time. We do it in our marriages, right? We get in a tiff. Our spouse does something stupid, so I'm going to one-up what they do. We're parenting our kids, and our kids do something stupid, so I'm going to one-up what they're doing. We do it all in life. And so here he's doing it again with the father. So the son, the prodigal son, the younger one, he did something that was a disgrace to his father. We looked at that last week. And he was worthy of being beaten or worse for this. So what the older brother does is he does this and pouts outside, which is also worthy of a beating from the father. And he doesn't get it either. Neither of the kids get the beating that they deserved in this situation. Now, that's not odd to us because we don't actively beat our children, but in ancient Near Eastern culture, yes, they would have done this. I mean, maybe even being stoned in some contexts. So you get a little bit odd things happening here. But yet the older brother doesn't see the irony that he's doing something that is shaming his father, just as the younger brother did something that was shaming the father. He completely missed that. But he's more righteous, remember? So the older brother didn't really care about the brother's future. I think that's pretty obvious. As soon as he was gone, he was like, hey, good riddance. Which brings us to a very interesting point that we can draw from this story. And this isn't the main point, but this is something to stick in your back pocket for a rainy day. You can't make peace when you are offended. When you are carrying offense, you cannot be a peacemaker. And you're going to see it happen in your relationships where you are actively bringing discord to the situation. But also, there's going to be times when you have to bring peace and you can't because you are the one with the attitude that stinketh. That's King James. You are the one with the attitude who stinks. So you cannot bring peace in that situation. Have you ever had an attitude towards a family member, and then when the family's not getting along, you try to step in and be the resolver of conflicts? Doesn't work out too well, does it? Because you've been the one sticking your finger in the pie the whole time. You've been the one drawing the irritation. And now, just like with the older brother, he's been carrying the offense, so he couldn't make peace between the father and the younger son because he himself was offended. So he insults his father as well. He didn't reconcile the father with the son, but also he added his own insult to the mix as well. And here's the amazing thing in all this. The double standard of the older brother. See, the father's mercy to him was okay. It's okay that I'm getting mercy from my father because I deserve it. I didn't take off. Right? But it's not okay that my brother is receiving mercy because he's the one who took off. It's not okay for them. God strike them down, but not me. I don't deserve to be stricken down, but they deserve to be stricken down. I was faithful in things. I was the good older brother, so I deserve a free pass. And I can do something immoral. There was actually, and I've told this story here before, but and it's not a singular story. This kind of stuff happens all the time. But there was a woman whose husband was constantly cheating on her. And so, she did the whole, well, I'm staying faithful to him. So, always bragging about how she was staying faithful. So then she started cheating on the husband. And her whole personality changed. And, her attitude going into it was, I'm better than him because I didn't cheat. So because I'm better than him, I'm going to start cheating. But in cheating, you're no longer better than him. You're like, do you not get how this works? And I don't think the older brother really is getting how this is working. Like, yeah, you had the upper hand, brother, but then you didn't rectify the situation. You did nothing to step in and intervene. You weren't there for your father or your brother. And now you're trying to pull the I'm still in the better place. And you're not. You're not. You're not. So let's hop forward to verse 29. Now let's look at this. But he replied to his father, Look here, buddy. I have been slaving. Notice the wording here. Always notice the words, because the Bible doesn't give us attitudes a whole lot, does it? It gives us what was said, and you just kind of have to draw your own conclusion. Like in the story of David and Bathsheba, when David tells Uriah to go back and sleep with his wife, Uriah says, oh, how could I do this thing? And you're left wondering, does Uriah know? It doesn't tell us if Uriah knows. It just says he doesn't do that. Well, it's the same thing here. We're kind of left to draw our own conclusions, but look at the words that are used here. Look, I have been slaving many years for you, and I have never disobeyed your orders. Hyperbole? Yet you never gave me a goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. Now, a goat obviously being smaller than the fattened calf. But when this son of yours came who has devoured your assets with prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him. Obviously, he's your favorite. Those of you with siblings, you're laughing. Those that didn't have siblings, you're not laughing. How does he know? How does the older brother know how his brother spent his wealth? Have you ever stopped and listened to what he just said? He said, your son, this son of yours, he went and spent all the money with prostitutes. How in the world would you know? He didn't even know that the brother was back. He obviously wasn't keeping up with him. Yet here he is saying that the younger brother is spending his wealth on prostitutes when he never even asked the brother, hey, what'd you spend your money on? Right? Like at Christmas time, right? When you were a kid, you would say, hey, what'd you get for Christmas? But here he doesn't even ask him, what'd you spend your money on? He's just like, well, it was probably prostitutes. And you also have another little issue where it sounds like he's disowning his family. And I'll read through it again so you kind of see what I'm saying. But he replied to his father, okay, and I'll come back to how that's important, but just bear with me. Look, I have been slaving many years for you. And pay attention to that too, slaving many years. But I digress. And I've never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me a goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your assets with prostitutes. You slaughter the fattened calf for him. So you have this kind of distancing that's happening with the older brother, and he's using these kinds of words that sounds like he's disowning his family, where he's not really addressing his father correctly, he's not addressing his brother correctly. And hold on. I'll come back to that, but I just want to mention this, okay? Sometimes we get this in our head where it's like this. Things are not going my way, so I'm not interested. Right? We do this in our marriages. We do this in our churches. We do this in our families. We do it so on and so forth. Where things aren't going my way, so I'm done. I'm just going to go ahead and go. I'm going to go pout. You're going to leave. Now we can hop back to my point about distancing, and that's, it was a big no-no to address your father by not addressing him by a title. Let me say that differently. It was a big no-no to not address your father by his title. So either you would call him father or sir or something, but you wouldn't just say, look here, I've slaved. Whoa, coming in a little hot, buddy. You would not address your father here, but yet here he's addressing his father like that. And then your brother, he goes out of his way to say your son, not my brother. And you might say, if you're maybe a little more, what's the word, frugal? If you're a little more frugal, you might say maybe he was upset because he's going to lose part of his inheritance because the brother came back. Well, I understand your point, but no, he wasn't going to lose anything because the assets were already divided. They couldn't get any more divided than they were. The brother stood to lose nothing. Nothing. Welcoming the brother back would have cost him nothing. It wasn't even his disgrace. It was his father's disgrace. So once again, he had nothing to lose, and yet he still wouldn't do it. He cared more for wealth than his brother. I think that's obvious. And just to make this story seem a little bit less foreign, keep in mind that this same thing happens all the time in churches. A lot of times, I've talked to people that care more for the music of the church than for the people in the church. You might say, how do you mean? How do you mean? Well, I mentioned this before, but I used to be a worship pastor a long time before I was here being a senior pastor. And one thing is, music has never surprised me as one of the greatest dividing lines between Christians. It's crazy. It's insane. Christians will fight about whether we're singing the old songs or the new songs, what the musicians are doing or the lack of musicians. You know, this, that, and the other thing. If the mood's not right, if the lights are turned off, if the lights are not turned off, if there's a smoke machine, if there's not a smoke machine. I mean, everything under the sky. Christians love to fight about music. I have no idea why. When I was a kid, it was always like, you can't listen to that because that music is of the devil, Bobby Boucher. And, then you got older and you started to realize it wasn't really quite such a defined line. But still, there's just a lot of issues there. And I found that a lot of people even go so far as to leave a church if the music doesn't go their way. So once again, I'll say it again, a lot of times people have cared more for music in the church than for the people of the church. If I leave a church, it's going to have nothing to do with the music. And I'm not saying that because I'm the pastor. I can't leave, right? But I mean even before I was a pastor. I used to not be a pastor. People get surprised when I say stuff and they say, well, you're a pastor. It's like, well, yeah, but that was recent, right? Like, when I give tithes now as a pastor, but before I was a pastor, I gave tithes too. Like, I pay tithes. That one always blows people away too. Like, oh, you're not sitting back in the back office with like all this money that you're only. No, I'm not. Like, what? And here's my favorite when people say, well, I stopped giving, but you know that. It's like, how would I know that? Because I'm sitting there like scrolling through the thing like, who gave this week, Anyways, so I wasn't always the pastor, but so now as a pastor, I'm saying something that I wouldn't always say, before. I mean, that I would have already said. You know what I'm saying, but that I would have still said before. And that's, so I'm going to leave the church based off this thing rather than the people. So which one do you care more for, the people or the music? Well, the music. If you cared more for the people, you'd serve them. If you care more for the music, you'll serve that. And at the end of the day, your heart comes out. I would never leave a church for music. I would leave the church for something serious, like the pastor is actively teaching something that is heretical. Not something I don't agree with. I mean heresy, such as Jesus isn't fully God. Okay, now we've got a heresy. But I'm not talking about something that, I just don't see eye to eye with his political views. That's not heresy. I'm talking about when you are going against a foundational principle of the Bible. See what I mean? The church has to be more than simply a group of people. It has to be a body, a family. And that's exactly what's happening here. There is a split happening between the prodigal father and the prodigal older son. And it didn't surface until the prodigal younger son messed up. Amazing thing happening here. So let's move on with the story, okay? And as far as this, I was just going to skip past it, but I'll just kind of break it down. Some things that we see with the older brother is that he assumed knowledge when he didn't have it. He disowned the family, and then also his priorities were just massively different from the father. But let's go ahead and move on to verse 30. It says, "Son," he said to him, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead." So even though the older brother is trying to separate, you see the father trying to reunite. Because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And I think that this, really by this point, we've seen something surface that was hidden throughout the story, because all of our focus was on the obvious one. You know what I mean? Well, we have a nasty habit of judging other people. I mean, come on. We walk through Walmart, we think, I know your story. Don't we? I mean, we kind of judge a book by its cover, right? I mean, come on. In part, you kind of have to do this. Like, you look like a druggie. I'm not going to rent to you. That was not funny. Okay, all right. But, you know, we all kind of do this. And when it comes to this story, I think that it reveals a lot of stuff in our heart and in their heart, too. So the younger brother's mistakes were very obvious to see. But the older brother thought he was okay because his mistakes were harder to see. See that? As long as the outside looks okay, I'm all right. Especially for those of us who grew up in the church. This is harder because we, in a lot of ways, are a lot like the Pharisees. And people who didn't grow up in the church, they didn't really have this problem because they remember who they used to be. And then they came to Christ. But when you grow up in the church, it's different. It's different. You think about things differently. I mean, church has always been a part of it. God's always been there. You don't really think about it as like this great big separation. You don't really see yourself as like that bad of a person, because I've always been in the church. I grew up in the church. You know, and you just, I know more than other people. It's harder to look at it and say, okay, yeah, but I still need to change. I still need to grow. And so now take that knowledge you have growing up in the church and see, now you're a Jew. This has been going on for generation after generation. Much harder to see the problem. And so Jesus tells this parable to show a problem that's there the whole time. The older brother did his duty. He did it. He did it admirably, but he had no joy in the doing. Look at what I've done. Look at my performance. Give me a pat on the head. I've been faithful in ministry. Yeah, but out of obligation. Out of obligation, not out of freedom. Well, I don't want the pastor to be upset at me. I don't want the people to look down on me, so I'm going to volunteer for this thing and get off my back. The brother served from obligation, not from freedom. And this is the thing that really blows me away. Okay, and I'll have to come back to this, but he didn't do it from freedom when he was free. Put a pin in that, we'll come back to that. But if your ministry doesn't do well, if you do a ministry, if you serve in a ministry and it doesn't do well, what is probably the very first thing you think? I'm a failure. You take it personally, right? Because you did this thing and it didn't work out, so obviously the problem's with me. And then you go through this like guilt-tripping thing because, you know, if I was a better so-and-so, then God would have opened doors. It's okay. Pastors aren't the only ones who do this. Everybody who served in ministry does this. And something that reveals is that it reveals in your heart you had the idea that you are doing your duty to earn your place. You're doing your duty to earn your place. It's not because of the freedom that you're doing this thing. No, it's because you have a duty, and so you're trying to fulfill it. So people will accept you, and God will accept you, and you'll be good enough. It's out of obligation. That's exactly what the older brother did. He's not walking in the freedom of I'm the son. He's rather walking in, well, I'm doing all the things right, so things better go my way. So now let's kind of bring things we've looked at back then. Let's kind of tie things together. Who is the older brother for the audience that Jesus is actually talking to back then, 2,000 years ago? Who's the older brother? Well, if we look at the beginning of chapter 5, we see all the tax collectors and sinners were approaching to listen to Jesus, to Jesus. And the Pharisees and scribes were complaining. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. So now we can kind of push things together. The Pharisees and scribes, there's the religious of Israel. They are the older brother. In today's terms, it would be people who grew up in the church and are very unwelcoming towards newcomers. So whereas the prodigal son was a prodigal with his wealth, the prodigal brother is a prodigal with his attitude. He gives his attitude lavishly. He never forgives, he never forgets, he never does anything to try and rectify the situation. He just lets everybody have a piece of his mind all the time. And the whole time he tells himself it's better because his heart was pure, whereas this other son's heart was not pure. Israel, at this time, they didn't care about the lost of Israel. They also didn't care about the lost of the world. They did not care. They did nothing to reconcile the Gentiles to the Father. Nothing. They were the older brother. They should have, and yet they didn't. So now here's Jesus saying, "What's up, man?" Instead of waiting for, trying to reconcile the father with the son, they waited for the judgment, just like the older brother did. He didn't care where the younger brother was as long as he's not here. Now, to bring it nowadays, sometimes we do that same thing in the church too. I don't care as long as you're not here. But if we've been grafted in, our responsibility is to the people. Israel was doing their duty, but they had no respect for God. They were doing their duty, but they had no love of God. In their desire and zeal for the law, they missed the God of the law. They had no respect for God. They had no love for man. They didn't even really know God. When Jesus, God himself, came down, they rejected him because they didn't know the Father. So how would they have accepted the Son? Rather, they were doing something out of obligation. Well, we don't want to be exiled from our land again. We want these rotten Romans to be killed. We want all the Greeks gone. And a lot of times, and I'm sure many of you have heard some people say something like this, but a lot of times, many people go to church for years and never really walk with God. And more, a lot of times people go to church for years, walk with God for years, and then just stop. Somehow it switches, wow, God, I love you, I'm amazed by you, to I'm doing my job. Here I am. I'm not walking in the joy of the Lord, but I'm here. What does it matter if I gossip, but I'm here? I'm doing the same thing every week, but I'm here. That's not the joy of the Lord. God has bigger plans for us than that. The religious Jews weren't losing anything by welcoming in the Gentiles at that point. But instead, they ended up gaining God's wrath on themselves, the same wrath that they desired on others. Now, let's kind of switch gears here. A lot of times we feel betrayed if someone leaves the church, this church specifically. And more so than that, when somebody leaves Christianity, we really have a hard time. Let's look, for instance, Psalm 55 says this. It says, "Now it is not an enemy who insults me, otherwise I could bear it." It's not just somebody out there. It is not a foe who rises up against me. Otherwise, I could hide from him. But it is you, a man who is my peer, my companion, and good friend. We used to have close fellowship. We walked with the crowd into the house of God. We worshiped together in church. We did this small group, or, whatever has happened in the past. We did those things together. Oftentimes, the same thing happens with our families, too. We'll go by and our families will kind of get a rift in them, and we just bear this grief, and we feel such betrayal. And oftentimes we justify our bad attitudes with something like this. Well, they did it before, they'll do it again. Now, let me clarify. There are definitely people who have left any church, that they are not welcome through the front door. They have to go through the pastor's office door. There needs to be a conversation that happens before they come back. That's in any church. Any church. You don't just cause a problem, leave, and then come back willy-nilly. And I say that not with anybody in mind. I say that because I know a lot of pastors, and we all see similar situations happen over and over again. So I'm not saying anything like that kind of discernment doesn't need to happen. And I'm definitely not saying that if there's somebody who did poorly in a ministry and they leave and then they come back, I'm just going to let them back in the ministry again, right? There's going to be like a time of like a trial and period, like kind of welcome them back in, kind of help them find their feet again, see how they're doing spiritually, if they're maturing, and then you walk them back into ministry. And that's wisdom. I'm not saying anything against that, but what I am saying is where you won't even forgive them and give them that, was it olive branch? You won't even welcome them in the door. You won't even have that conversation because they did it before they'll do it again. Whereas me, I was faithful all the time. You overlooked me, God. Disaster struck me and they got off scot-free. I stuck to my ministry, I stuck to my church, I stuck to my duty, and all you're left with is a heartless religion. And somehow you change into the bad guy. But what we need to remember is, don't you remember when we first got saved, we turned to God and we basically said something, we all said something very similar. God, you have all of me. Take my whole life, take my whole future. You remember? Remember the zeal that you came to God in worship. Well, hold on there. That means that if we did that at salvation, we gave up our rights. We no longer have the right to bear our iniquity or whatever against those who have wronged us. See what I mean? We no longer carry that torch. But the thing that this older brother didn't get is he was serving out of duty, but sons don't work to gain an inheritance. Do you get that? Sons do not work to gain the inheritance. Sons stand to gain an inheritance by their birth. But the older brother was trying to prove himself and earn his place when he already had it. You can tell because he says this, I slaved for you. You didn't have to. You didn't have to. Obviously, the father's not a taskmaster, or else he would have been all over that son's case when he left in the first place. But instead of him walking in the freedom of his father, he's always trying to prove his place. See, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and oftentimes Christians who've been in the church a long time, we miss that. We miss it, and we go back to duty. We're called to forgive. We are not working to earn our salvation. There's no striving here. That's the whole purpose of Christmas. The point of Christmas is that there's no more striving. We have entered rest. We're walking in the Father's freedom through the blood of Christ. And that anger and that indignant feeling that we have towards people who have wronged us, that's in line with the Pharisees. That's not in line with the Father. It's not in line with Jesus. Some people are going to leave any church. Some people are going to leave any faith. That doesn't mean that you change because they changed. See, your attitude isn't governed by their actions, right? You get to choose yourself. You don't get to choose how you feel. How you feel is it just happens. But you get to choose what to do with it. See what I mean? Just because I'm yelled at on Sunday morning before a service doesn't mean I have to come up here and yell at you during a service, right? Now, I wasn't. Don't feel bad for me. I wasn't. I'm just giving a hypothetical situation, okay? Just because something happens to me doesn't mean I have to take it out on you. And now, hold on. You might say, I never do that, but hold on. I'm speaking as a man here because I'm a man. Haven't you ever gone to work, man, gotten really upset, and maybe taken out a little bit on your wife or your kids or your mother or your father or whoever? Haven't you done that a little bit maybe? I know I have, and, maybe take that for whatever it is, but, moving on. That anger feeling that we have isn't really in line with the Father. If the brother had obeyed from love and not duty, this is how we know he didn't, but if he had obeyed from love and duty, love instead of duty, he would have joyed to reconcile the Father with the Son. But he did not joy to do it at all. He was not excited. Rather, he says, I slaved. And this is what I want to close off on here. Faithfulness means nothing if it's not from love. Faithfulness means nothing. If you served in ministry and your go-to is, well, I've been faithful, I've done these things, therefore, you missed it. You missed it. And I'm not just talking about when you're talking to me, like, hey, Pastor, I was faithful. That's neither here nor there. I'm also talking about with God. God, I don't deserve for these bad things to happen because I was faithful. I was one of the good ones. I was one of the righteous. Throw your bolts of lightning at the sinners, but spare me. Faithfulness means nothing if it's not from love. Do what you can in any situation to bring peace and then surrender it to the Father. But remember in all these things that faithfulness means nothing if it's not from love. Love continues even past hope and faith. Please join me in prayer. I just want to take a minute just to make sure, if the Lord's speaking to you today, today is the day to forgive. Today is the day to move forward with your walk with Him. Doesn't matter what you did in the past. Today is the day that God wants you further with Him. Don't wait for tomorrow. Today. Really weigh your heart before the Lord. The Lord already knows it anyways. Why are you mad about these things? Why are you carrying around an offense? Is it because you're trying to earn grace and prove your worthiness? You're already a son and daughter of the Father. And if you are harboring resentment towards somebody else because of your own faithfulness, you're not getting that you're walking as a son and daughter already. Maybe you're jealous of them. It seems like everything's bad's happening to me. How come they're not going through bad things? The Bible says not to become envious or jealous of the evildoers. How much more so for people who aren't evildoers? Sometimes we go and we say, Lord, I deserve better than this. The Lord doesn't owe us anything. Our inheritance is coming. It is. And maybe you're saying, well, I've just been hurt too bad. Most of the time when you're struggling with a bad attitude, it's not going to be something that happens overnight. You're going to have a journey to let go. It's important that you don't expect yourself to be at the end of the journey already, but take the next step. Let the Lord take you on a journey to move you forward. Lord, I pray for the people here. I just pray that especially as we go into the holidays, you bless them. Bless their families. Bless their lives. Help them to walk in freedom and not in duty. Any dime that they give, Lord, help it never to be from compulsion, that they have to do something. Any second that they give, help it not to be something that they do just because, well, I got to earn my place. Rather, Lord, let them walk in your freedom. Don't let them be slaves of obligation, Lord, but let them walk in the freedom of Christ. Lord, in everything that they do or don't do. Lord, and I pray that you'd bring peace and unity in their families. Help them to get along. Help the holidays not to be more stressful than it needs to be. Lord, help them to really get along.